And staying with China, the removal of two top generals by regime leader Xi Jinping has created much speculation on the internal power struggles and how they could affect regional security. Joining us now is Rod D. Martin. He's a geopolitical analyst and founder and CEO of Martin Capital. Rod, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining. Of course, everybody now has heard about the removal of these two generals. What's your understanding, though, of what's happening behind the scenes in Beijing?
Well, it's very clear that the Western media is confused as usual about all of this, and it's easy to understand why. It's all very confusing. Totalitarian regimes don't really do transparency. But it seems pretty clear if you look at this over the last year, and for that matter, over the last several years, that this is a rolling purge. And that purge is not about corruption. That purge is a power struggle between what seems pretty clearly at this point to be Xi Jinping and his faction and Zhang Youxia, the highest ranking general in the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, who, we all here are best friends. But that's clearly not the case. And we have seen purge and what seems to be counter purge now all year long, really reaching a frenzy in October, just before the Party Congress, when you lose 9 senior Chinese military leaders in a day. It's just extraordinary. And a lot of those men seem to be allies of Xi. Well, now we have what looks like a reprisal with Zhang and his chief deputy in custody. We don't know where that goes, but it's very dangerous.
And Rod, for people who don't really understand the concept of factions due to not having a sort of an open political process, as you kicked off by saying, how can somebody from the outside begin to understand what the factions are, how many there are, and sort of what makes Xi unique, really, since Mao Zedong?
Well, he is. And a lot of this looks like echoes of the Cultural Revolution. Xi is consolidating power the best he can and has been from the beginning of his time, including extending the term limit so that he could continue to serve beyond what had become customary prior to his reign. He is creating a cult of personality, has been for quite some time, has really gotten rid of everybody in the entire government, not just the military, who could possibly be a challenge to him or a logical successor. The net result of that is that there are hardly any competent people in senior leadership. This is one of the dangerous things about losing Zhang. It seems from all intents that it's actually the military that is hesitant about invading Taiwan. They understand the real limitations of the Chinese military. They understand what they're facing if they try to cross the Formosa Strait. Xi Jinping does not seem to. He seems to be a gambler. And the fact that he keeps purging people who can really hurt him in his government, people who can fight back, tells you that gambler instinct is there, and it makes it very dangerous for a confrontation with Taiwan, with Japan, and with the United States.
Rod, I'd like to explore that point a bit further. It seems as if this survival mode, almost like a cockroach, they just always know how to survive. The party protects itself, and when it feels like there's a boil in civil unrest, especially from the economy and potentially some of the tariffs that Trump is imposing, putting more pressure on the economy, that the party maybe backs away from military aggression against Taiwan. Are you saying potentially that she sees opportunity to consolidate and squash any civil unrest through military action in Taiwan?
Look, my assessment continues to be that an invasion of Taiwan is relatively low probability, not because Beijing doesn't want to do it, but because Beijing knows that it's a very high-risk operation. But in line with what you're saying, in this situation, it might make sense to Xi, especially with yes men around him now, really almost exclusively. it might make sense to him to try something that a different group of leaders did not that long ago. That would be the Argentine junta, the generals who ran Argentina in the 70s and early 80s. They invaded the Falkland Islands, assuming it would be a walkover, assuming Britain was much too far away to do anything about it. Margaret Thatcher sent an armada to the South Atlantic, booted them out, and in a matter of months, all of those generals were in prison, and you had a democracy in Argentina. I think Zhang Youxia understands that example better than Xi Jinping, and I think that Xi might actually think he can gamble and pull something off that Zhang would try to dampen. So I don't think that's going to happen, but there's a much increased danger today as opposed to a month ago.
And Rod, I want to get your view on how President Trump's move on Venezuela and his pressure on Iran is changing the calculus for Xi. Does it embolden him to try something with Taiwan, or does it potentially, seeing the effectiveness of the U.S. operation, does it make him think twice?
I think it definitely gave the PLA some pause. I mean, they understand. They may not understand exactly all of the details of how we did what we did, but they understand what we did. And it's really remarkable. It's quite extraordinary in history. And so I think it gave them pause. I think it might embolden Xi. And more to the point, it cuts off some options for him. He's really got to make a decision now. Is he going to lean into the export-driven economy that the CCP has built for China, which requires good relations with the United States, to a lesser degree Europe, but certainly the U.S., because our consumer market is absolutely essential to their not going into a depression? Or is he going to try to break out of that in a moment where our disruption of the shadow fleet potentially cuts off his ability to buy 90% of Iran's oil and buy most of Russia's oil and gas? And so he's got a decision to make here. I actually think it will probably work out in a positive direction, but I am very concerned about the elevated risk.
Does seem as if we're moving toward an inflection point. The removal of both of these two generals certainly shows that Xi is making moves behind the scenes. Appreciate you sharing your insights with us, Rod Martin. Good to see you.
And you.